are new signs of diplomatic progress this morning after the president of Colombia accused the U.S. of war crimes last night. Now, that accusation followed the latest U.S. military strike on suspected drug boats. CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd joins me now with some context in all of this. Sam, great to see you this morning. What message do you think the U.S. is trying to send with these strikes, considering no evidence of drug running has been shared publicly? And what are the risks of this type of mission?
Well, Errol, to be very clear, drugs pose a serious national security threat and public health threat to the United States, especially fentanyl. Last year alone, Customs and Border Protection seized 22,000 kilograms of fentanyl at our land borders. It takes just 2 milligrams of fentanyl to cause an overdose in an average-sized adult. However, the Trump administration has chosen to make the counter-narcotics fight quite black and white. Going from where we are today to launching military strikes on suspected vessels carrying narcotics is a major escalation, when in fact there are other options available. When we think about counter-narcotics, and I worked on this extensively while at DHS, we think about the entire supply chain of an illicit substance. If you look at just fentanyl alone, most of the precursors, the inputs to making fentanyl, come from China. Most fentanyl is in fact manufactured in Mexico and then crosses our land border in private vehicles. So increasing intelligence sharing with Mexican authorities, increasing equipment at our southern border to try to monitor for fentanyl crossing in vehicles would be a more responsible step than blowing up boats in international waters, which really could run the risk of military escalation in the region.
Right, and they're publicly sharing video of the strikes, but they're not sharing the evidence, what was known about the people on board, and where these boats were possibly heading. So many more questions there. I want to turn our attention quickly to Ukraine, though, because we're learning more about the recent meeting between President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. What are your sources telling you?
What we are hearing is that the phone call that preceded President Trump's meeting with President Zelensky really changed the course of Zelensky's interactions with President Trump. As you well know, Errol, coming out of President Trump's summit with President Putin in Alaska, there was supposed to be a trilateral meeting between the three leaders so that Russia and Ukraine could start talking about conditions for perhaps a ceasefire or for ending a war. That has certainly not materialized. President Trump was growing incredibly frustrated with President Putin and was even considering putting more pressure on President Putin by giving President Zelensky, by giving the Ukrainians something known as a Tomahawk missile, a long-range supersonic precision missile. However, President Putin played the game well. He had a call with President Trump directly before Trump's meeting with Zelensky and talked Trump down from giving Zelensky those missiles and really floated the concept of another Trump-Putin summit at an undetermined time. So Zelensky walked away from the White House without getting the security assistance that he likely desperately needs to continue the war.
And what should we make of that? Because coming out of the call and the Zelensky meeting, President Trump sounded as if he wanted Vladimir Putin to effectively get what he wants if the borders remain in place, meaning Russia keeps the land that it has effectively annexed. And, President Trump said he won't allow Ukraine to have those Tomahawk missiles. Also, lower-level meetings that were meant to take place between the Ukrainians and the Americans were postponed. And now you have this potential meeting between Trump and Putin in Budapest, that location key. What should we make of all those pieces?
Well, a major sticking point, as you mentioned, is where we start negotiations and where a ceasefire begins. Is Ukraine negotiating from a position with Russia has already agreed to even discuss land swaps, or is Russia insisting that it holds on to any territory that it's already seized? And I do think, Errol, it's important to note that Putin has an interest in prolonging fighting for as long as possible. He's trying to grab as much land as he can before at some point there may be negotiations on holding on to territory that's been seized or even some sort of land swap. So we should expect Putin to try to continue to prolong the war and to kick the can on negotiations. He views this as upside. His strategy here is to try to bleed the Ukrainian military dry, to try to ensure that security assistance for Ukraine dries up. We've already seen the U.S. take a bit of a step back on that, and to engage in the slow bleed strategy. He's trying to get as much territory as possible while he does all of that. So the longer that he can push off not just a summit with Trump, but negotiations with the Ukrainians is advantageous when it comes to his military strategy.
All right, Sam Vinograd helping us understand it all. Sam, great to have you with us this morning. Thanks for being here.